man whose throat is full of them, joins us now. Norvan Akwa-Hayford from the Joy Business team. How nice to see you, and Happy New Year.
Many happy returns,
Good,
brother.
good.
At least, ya cross, ya jump.
Your Range Rover is parked outside and I'm washing it.
Amen.
So you want me to wash your car?
Yeah. Well, the Range Rover will come. It's not the washing. No, it's not the washing. I mean, it's just the Range Rover arriving itself.
That's the amen part.
I mean, that's the amen to it.
Well, it's great to see you. It's great to see you. And in fact, it's been an eventful year.
Oh.
Now, normally at this time, we just have newspapers spread out. But as you know, many of the publishing houses are on Christmas break, and so we will resume the usual newspaper review in the coming days. But for today, I think it gives us the opportunity to have a quick look over the year, see how a couple of things have gone. And I mean, Norvan, for the conversations you and I have had, they've usually been around the banking crisis.
Yes.
And there's been the latest development just yesterday, the deadline for banks to meet the minimum capitalization requirement passed. What's the latest? What do we know about it?
Just as you said, it's been very interesting. At the time of yesterday morning, we knew that about 24, 25 of them had met. Officially, we had 22. And then over the weekend, I mean, that is prior to Friday, by Friday close of business, you had about 3 also saying we've been able to raise the money. So you just needed the central bank to come and confirm.
Right.
We've been waiting for the governor, who probably tomorrow, which is a working day, Wednesday, would address, will I say the nation or the media, or tell everybody, I mean, captains of industry, as to what the real situation is.
So to be clear, that will be 25 out of how many?
We're talking about some 30 banks.
Right.
You know, okay. But what is interesting, Kojo, is that what happened yesterday, sort of, you know, when we found out that the government was ready and willing to support these local banks. But what's the background to this? You recall that somewhere June, July, or I think August, within those 3 months, the local banks in this country went to see the president, and they did indicate that we cannot watch our banks, which is the local ones, to go down, because that wasn't going to be healthy for the economy. The simple economics of scale to that appeal was that you do not want to expose the banking sector to foreigners. I mean, overly exposed, let me put it that way, because already they are in. I mean, they are forming the majority in terms of the kind of banks that we have here, be it from Nigeria, South Africa, UK, or wherever they are coming from. And so it made sense to say that by the first quarter of every year, what you see is this. When they declare profits at the end of the year, between January and March, they will have to repatriate these profits to their people, which is their shareholders, by paying them dividends. And so this was one of the things that was happening. And Kojo, that also, I will tell you today, played a role in the city's depreciation. Because if you watch, every year, at the beginning of the year, I mean, in the first quarter up to the first half, the city is not able to, you know, stand on its own. Let me put it that way, just for the benefit of our listeners. You always see depreciation, the city against the dollar, because these people were looking for dollars to be able to repatriate. And so the local banks made a case to the president and said, listen, when we are supported even by the government here, the monies that you give to us, when we declare profits, they are not going away. They will be reinvested into the business here in the country. And so it was just appropriate that we should be supported, or we should be given time to raise these monies. Because one, we are good banks. All our ratios are correct. We are solvent banks. Our only challenge is our inability to be able to recapitalize. That is finding the extra money to move from the 120 million that we are, you know, as of yesterday, let me put it that way. But today, it's 400 million.
Right.
So to be able to meet the 400 million.
Now, you know, you explained their argument very clearly. But ultimately, isn't it the customer who will choose whether or not local banks will make profit or not? I mean, the customer has a choice of where to bank. So if local banks are helped to remain in business, and they don't make profits, then all the advantages that they are proposing to government will not come to pass, will they?
Kojo, I mean, I think that, you know, I don't like the saying that says the fewer the merrier. In customer service, in competition, in terms of pricing products that are put on the market, you would say the more you have, you know, more banks, you get to see that, you know, even the charges which you and I will have to pay for, you know, taking their service will be dropped, so they become competitive.
Now, in Nigeria, when they increased their minimum capitalization, it reduced the number of banks.
Yeah, from 89 to 20 of them.
Now, was that better for their economy or worse?
It was better for the economy, but...
So in their case, it wasn't necessarily the more the merrier. There was a need to cull the numbers.
Exactly. The central bank felt that, and the point was, if you can raise the money, you stay. And you're talking of 89 banks in the Nigerian economy at the time.
Yeah. Now there are 20.
I mean, it came down to 20.
Now, here's the thing. That is even less than Ghana has, when Nigeria's population is several times more than Ghana's. So I guess the next logical question is that even if the more the merrier is 23, that's how many we know have met the minimum. Isn't that still too many for Ghana?
Well, Kojo, this is very interesting. And the interesting part of it is that, look, I thought this raising of the minimum capital requirement, which is requesting for recapitalization, was going to drop the number of banks that we had. But we've been proven some way, somehow wrong. Now, see what has happened. And I keep asking myself that if almost all the banks are going to be meeting this, 400 million, and the reason being that if the government is putting 2 billion into supporting some 6 banks, and the fine details have shown that each bank is going to be getting some 280 million Ghana cedis, and that is in return for some shareholding from these banks. Now, the government, in a way to exit that, have said that, if you, within 5 years, if you have the money, you can pay us, that's your shareholders and everything, or we would list that on the stock exchange. Another way to put more banks on the stock market or on the capital market, or better still,
so they will list their shares.
Their shares on the stock exchange. So depending on that 280 million, if it will give them, let's say, 50% stake in your business, it will give them 30%, it will give them controlling stake, whichever it is, there's room for you to be able to. And don't forget, that's why they are forming the amalgamated trust. And that special purpose vehicle, the SPV they call it,
to
manage this 2 billion
shares.
and then be able to do that. But they have said also that if you need more than 280 million, what you ought to do is to merge. So still some measures. Remember that Sahel and Omni Bank were already in measure talks. Remember that First Atlantic Energy Bank, trying to get Energy Bank. We hear of other things that we had, but we will get fine details.
So instead of us seeing a situation where this increase in the minimum capitalization brings some sort of rationalization of numbers to the banking sector, what we are seeing is that it's simply increasing government's influence in the banking sector.
You may want to say that, and that is on the local banks.
Yes.
Don't forget that. And at the moment, how many local banks does government have control? They used to have Construction Bank and all those ones. Now we are left with ADB, NIB.
Yeah.
This is where government really, really has, controlling stakes.
But if this happens, not anymore.
I mean, when this happens, I'm sure that almost all the local banks in question that we are not putting the names out yet, will be having stake in it. And that's why I'm saying that 280 million, we don't know how much percentage that will be given. We even understand that other banks are showing interest, because Kojo, once we go forward, I would explain to you to understand that there is a new regime which moves us away from using your minimum capital requirement to do business. Before, when it was 60 million or 6 million or 120, you understand, when you have that amount of money, that is what the bank used in transacting business as usual, whether investment, placing them as investment, giving them to you as loans and all that in terms of managing their risk profile and everything. But what is happening now is that now the Bank of Ghana says, when we call on Bank B, at any point in time that we do so,
that money should be there.
400 million should be sitting there. So now there is that extra responsibility on all these banks to look for funding to do their business. I don't want us to use a lot of technical terms.
Yeah,
so
basically, I get it. So
that's what it is. So
in essence, we can expect the cost of banking to go up.
You will not say the cost really to go up, but then this helps in making the banking industry resilient, robust, and all that. And when there are issues,
provided the banks can continue to make profit, right?
I mean, of course they will. I mean, and I think that's how come even banks who have met, you understand, and then they're going to be able to build capacity and all that. And you see, what's going to happen is that this is going to help them themselves, okay, to be able to withstand any shocks that comes their way. Because you have a 400 million sitting somewhere. If there's a problem, you'll be able to deal with it. And I think that is very good. Today, the question initially I wanted to add, let people understand is that what has taken place gives us an indication of probably a resilient banking sector in Ghana. Because just when we thought that we're going to have banks go down, reduce the numbers, everybody has crossed. And this happened from 60 to 120.
Well, not everybody has crossed. Some of them are being helped across the line by the government.
Helped or not, at the end of the day, they've gotten it. So people have put their funding in there.
Yeah, but there
in
are
the small economy of yours.
Yes, there are implications which we do have to discuss. 2 billion of our money is being used for this, and so we need
a bond being issued.
Yes, it's still our money. Yeah. So we will talk about the implications of this going forward. But I'm always thinking about those who were affected the most when things went wrong. For those banks that didn't make it, those banks that were consolidated this year, and of course the 2 last year. So we have this very quick report for you, which kind of reminds you of the impact of the banking crisis on bankers.
Happy times at a wedding reception. Moment of bliss as guests party to wish the groom and his bride well. Raymond Dankwa is one of them, but he's not here for the party. He's the man on the grill, dishing out sumptuous pork for the night. This time last year, Raymond was a deputy manager at the now defunct Capital Bank, until the bank blew up its working capital, leaving it bankrupt. New owners of the bank had promised workers like Raymond job security. That did not happen. He was sacked, and 1 year on, he's yet to be paid his benefits.
I'm not the type of person who wants to be idle. So I find it difficult to cope with the current situation now. Cooking has been one of my passion and growing up. So I started what we call the Rat Kitchen, where I supply foods to people at financial institutions. So we come up with a menu, you choose, and then normally too I do more often grilling during the weekend for people at functions.
This is the Bank of Ghana headquarters, from where the fate of Capital and UT Bank was decided in August of 2017. 1 year on, 5 more banks have collapsed. With a scandal that has hit the sector in the last 2 weeks, no one knows who the central bank will be going after next. And that has left thousands of people working in the banking sector sitting on tenterhooks.
UT and Capital Bank had more than 1,200 workers. Most of them have been sacked since the bank's collapse, but many of them, afraid of victimization by their old employers and prospective ones, have been forced into silence. I'm going to meet Ernestina Jesse, not her real name though, one of them who has agreed to speak to me. She has asked that I keep her identity secret.
A lot of people, especially the ladies, are scared to talk. The person who is supposed to protect you, the ordinary staff, is a friend to this big man who has taken bad decisions leading to the collapse of this bank, rendering you jobless. So you have to be careful. So a lot of people are afraid because of the kind of backing our directors appear to have.
Now from what
Ernestina,
looks like
a single mother of one, worked with Capital Bank for 7 years, including the days when it was just a savings and loans company.
Now she says she cannot even afford to pay her hospital bills.
I haven't been lazy. For 10 years, I have not stayed home for a full month without going to work. So God knows that I am not lazy. So if I have put in 10 years of my youth to work, and through no fault of mine, my company has collapsed, I believe God has seen my plight and will make a way.
There are people who really have reduced, they had, they started a career, they had a certain vision, they're probably doing very well, and suddenly they've lost everything. How we deal with this matter is absolutely critical for how institutions are going to develop in this country. Because if what the reports that have come out are true, then we are on the verge of creating an oligarchy in this country. Somebody steals a chicken and it's in remand for he stays in remand for 3 years, 4 years. I mean, and somebody's accused of taking over 15% of our national income. This should go to court, and all of us should see that a trial, the state has prosecuted this thoroughly.
Back at the reception, dancing has gone deep into the night. But people like Ernestina and Raymond, living in uncertainty of what tomorrow may bring, continue to wait that what is due them is paid, and those responsible for bringing their years of toil to a crashing end will pay the price. Justice Paidu, JoyNews, Accra.
Wow, indeed. Let's hope for more good times for young people like those we saw in that clip there. But obviously, many were affected negatively, horribly, by the banking crisis. Now, we're very honored. It's the first day of the year, and a good friend of the show has made the time to join us. Let's say good morning to the Vice President of Imani, Salom Branti.
Bro, it's great to see you.
It's great to see you too. Thank you so much for making the time. And of course, Norvan and I were thick in the middle of the conversation about the banking crisis, one of the biggest stories of 2018, no doubt. And look, this has affected us all one way or the other. But the latest is what is fascinating us. So Norvan has told us what the government is likely to be announcing officially tomorrow, that 2 billion will be given to support local banks to help them meet this minimum capitalization requirement. So of course it took me to Nigeria, where the increase in the minimum capitalization reduced the number of banks from 80 something to 20. So that's less banks than we have in our country with a much smaller population. But in this case, it appears the minimum capitalization will not achieve the effect of reducing the number of banks. So what was the game plan all along, and are we better off now? Are we stronger, like Norvan suggests?
So I think that in one area, we have probably streamlined the banking sector to the point where only the serious players will be in the game, because we were all privy to the fact that quite a few years ago, banking licenses were being acquired like confetti at a wedding. And what it sought to do was to cheapen the whole banking sector and trivialize the kind of serious work that is required to do some of these things. And it was evidenced later by the kind of financial impropriety that some of the parties were what do you call it, participating in, yes. And it is good that we sanitize the system. However, I also believe that establishing such a draconian minimum capital requirement is not the only way to actually sanitize the system. For me, in a country where getting access to capital is so difficult, especially with local organizations or local business entities, I would have thought that we would have had a different look at that particular area, because you are locking up so much capital into just trying to be certified to exist. And I believe that that wasn't the best way to do it, because then it even leaves very little for the banks to maneuver with in terms of what kind of products they can produce, etc. And this is, mind you, this is a country where if you are Ghanaian and you want to do any kind of business, it is very difficult to get that amount of capital that you could get, or that foreigners bring in. I mean, we are all lamenting about the fact that quite a lot of businesses that require big ticket capital, what do you call it, ventures, are run by foreigners or are owned by foreigners.
Yeah.
So it looks like the country, the economy seems to be growing, or all the figures show the economy is growing, but who really owns the economy? We are not the ones who seem to own the economy, because all the big things that should have actually brought in a lot of wealth to Ghanaians or to Ghanaian entities are going out to foreign entities. So we don't own the money that we create, and that's the truth of the matter.
Yeah,
and some of these things are the things that also look very discouraging if you look at things like the minimum capital requirement that was, because immediately they issued this particular directive, a lot of the foreign-owned banks, they complied. A snap of a finger, but look at how the local banks are struggling. So there's an arbitrage, there's a gap. And I think that gap is not one that can be done by uniformly giving a directive to everybody. I think in some of these things we should be allowed to be discriminatory a bit, to be able to say that you, the local banks or local business entities in these particular areas which require high capital, high expertise, we should lend a sort of a helping hand. So for me, in that direction, since they are the ones who came up with a directive that we should have the 400 million, if they have done this bailout, package for these banks, I think it is in the right direction, because we can't let our local gems also suffer because of some of these rules.
But this increases government's control in these banks, because the arrangement, according to what Novan is picking up, is that the money will go sort of 280 million per bank.
Each bank.
And this, the bank can pay back over a period of 5 years if they're able, if they make enough, do enough business, they can do that. Otherwise, it will become shares owned by government of Ghana.
Well, so
which will be listed on the stock
exchange.
exchange.
One of two things. So I believe that, like he's saying, it should be, if the banks are not able to pay back in that period, then we should now begin to even make the stock market even more vibrant by putting these banks on the stock exchange. Also, it will also increase the scope or the expanse of the stock exchange itself. And then also the banks and their performance will also reflect in their stock values. So I think that indirectly it is a win-win situation, the way I see it, in that if the banks are not able to repay, then of course you should be able to allow some of that equity to be out there, because I think in every kind of endeavor of this kind of scenario or type, you would have these things happening where you would have some of your equity being offloaded to anybody who is willing to invest. And I think it is time that our stock exchange, for me, I think has been quite stagnant in terms of the membership for a while. So if we are even going to put a lot of these banks on, I think it is in the right direction, so that we are able to even have the banks use their marketing expertise, etc., to even whip up more investment, so that they can drive particular vehicles of their portfolio.
That's 5 years from now, though.
Yes.
So in the interim, there will be quite a bit of government control in these banks, and we can't put out a list of the banks that are affected until Bank of Ghana decides to do so. But knowing what we know, is it conceivable that this 280 million might end up giving government more than 50% share in some of these banks?
Well, I think we would have to look, when the list comes out, we'll have to look at the the worth of these, the net worth of these banks first.
But assuming that were to come to pass, or even something close to that, some massive controlling share going to government, what has been government's track record?
You see, that's where the problem is. Because,
in managing banks.
We are going to look at a situation where we are creating yet another avenue for government to unduly have the chance to interfere in corporate governance activity. For me, that is the biggest danger of all of these, because a lot of these banks, they are private entities. They've had a certain managerial ethos. They've had a certain track record, a certain trajectory of growth that they have been pursuing. Now we have the situation where, I mean, we all know the backdoor stories that happen in the banks that are state-owned, how executives are always recruited and imposed on management, and how some of these executives impose certain, I would say, weird decisions, weird in quotes, decisions, especially when it comes to who to give big loans to, etc., etc., and how these things tend to color the actual administration of the banks. And to the extent that the government is going to have this kind of controlling interest, or some kind of controlling interest in some of these banks, my wish would be that they do not interfere, or there is some kind of intervention, or some kind of I don't know, arrangement where it becomes just a matter of ownership, but not a matter of interference, especially in the board and what do you call it, C-level management. When I say C-level, I'm talking about the top hierarchy of management, because what usually happens is that, and eventually, even if it was not designed to happen, you'd have the situation where, because the government has a control interest, certain interests in government would want to exploit that particular power for their own personal gains.
Yes.
And these are the things that will actually cause a downward spiral in the growth of these banks. So that some of them will be performing stellar. It's just that they probably didn't have the resources and they have to resort to this. Then suddenly they now have to kowtow to somebody's whims and caprices, just because a person is an official of the state. And these are the things that we would rather not happen.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to Ghana Airways some of these banks.
Exactly, we don't want to do that.
Right, okay, now let's talk a bit more about the actual crisis that occurred during the year, the consolidation of these banks. And Novan, I want to invite you to assess how the necessary the relevant authorities have managed this situation since it happened. Okay, so we have receivers who are working at the moment, trying to identify assets and so forth, and trying to fix that problem. But in terms of the crime and punishment side of it, what do you think explains the sort of slow progress there? For example, why have we not seen anybody from Bank of Ghana indicted?
Well, it's quite an interesting question. I don't know if I have that, what do I call it, wherewithal to do those kind of assessment you're actually requiring of me. But in terms of the central bank itself, we know that officials who are even on pension, who are no more working there, have been invited several times by Yoko and then the financial intelligence unit. I think that maybe because these things have not been put in the public domain. And remember, Kojo, the wheels of justice, they grind slowly. Even if you take them to court, you know, and I know, it's not the same day that there'll be judgment. There need to be a lot of investigations, especially in these cases, to establish that indeed Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C, the then head of financial supervisory department, or the head of the banking service supervisory department, who is on pension, and then all the other guys who are being transferred, as the governor did indicate to us that they've done a lot of reshuffling within the system. People have been moved from head office to go into the regions. People have been brought from the regions back into the head office just to help in the, how will I say, restructuring and ensuring that the Bank of Ghana itself is on the right footing and begins to do the right job.
But there are some things that we have already established, haven't we? I mean, the Boulders report, is that the name?
Yes.
The Boulders report identified that in the case of Capital Bank, when they got some, what's it called, liquidity support,
Yes.
that there were some payments made to Bank of Ghana officials.
Yes.
That is in the report.
Yeah, but that's why I've told you that people have been going to
how many
these,
questions?
that's Yoko and then the
yeah,
financial
I'm not
intelligence
really
unit.
satisfied
But
because
I wouldn't
yeah.
be either. I mean,
I'm not
I wouldn't
really
be either,
satisfied.
but we just have to wait and see what will
I
come
think
out. Maybe
I think that we should be way more expeditious in dealing with some of these issues because these are things that really like tore down the middle of, let's say, Ghanaian corporate society to some extent. And the Bank of Ghana was grossly negligent. We all have to be bold and say it, that they were grossly negligent in allowing the situation to rot to the point where it got to. And you even see it, let me even stretch it further. You see it in all these other financial institutions that
MFIs.
are supposed to be non-deposit,
Yes, yeah.
non-bank deposit taking institutions. I mean, look at the list Bank of Ghana released, was it 3 days ago, listing 6 companies.
Yeah.
Some of these companies have gone underground. I mean, they've gone defunct for what, about 4, 5, 6 months already. And there's a lot of ineptitude and negligence there because the people there feel untouchable. That is why they've had a nerve to go on to this point. And if we don't begin to tackle these things expeditiously, I mean, a lot of these things started happening 4 or 5 years ago, and there's been a trail, even in, like you're saying, in some of the situations, there's been a trail. Let's make sure that we stamp down our authority on these issues very fast because you cannot, on one point, be acting very expeditiously on the private sector, on private sector players like the other banks, etc., and then you leave your own officials who are in cahoots with some of these people to ensure that some of these situations happen. You can't just leave them.
But sort of not to hold brief for the central bank, I think that even the Capital Bank and all these other banks themselves, I mean, the officials, yes, some of them have been put before court, like Capital Bank, and then you have some of them still
but
visiting.
They didn't act independently. They acted, some of them acted in collusion with officials of Bank of Ghana. Why aren't we seeing the officials of Bank of Ghana there? Only these private people are there. It's not like they just got up and then did everything.
I agree with you. I think that when
they couldn't have gone that far without the tacit support of some people who were part of the regulator. And that is the problem because we are always seeming to demonize the people in the private sector while forgetting that there were people in the public sector who helped them to make this thing happen.
Well, Dr. Addison, I'm sure this morning, if you are listening, you know very well that Ghanaians are still waiting to see what will happen to your own officials, whether on pension or still in service.
You can't be the headmaster of a school and say that only the students were bad. Some teachers would have had to help.
No doubt. Valid point. And I suppose these are some of the things we are looking forward to in 2019.
Exactly.
Shall we talk about men's gold?
Oh.
Yeah, we should. We should, to the extent that it is a matter that requires the nation, I mean everybody, to relearn how they should treat their finances. I think it's a very, very important thing. You see, I was having a discussion this weekend with one of my uncles, and even as the discussion went on, I began to understand why people would make the decision to, let's say, invest in men's gold. Of course, look at the kind of situation that happened with the banks, especially with the loss of confidence in the banking sector, leading to all these reshuffles, etc. And if you look at the fact that if you run, let's say, an ordinary savings account, it's probably one of the worst financial decisions you can make because the money that you put in that savings account will not even be up to inflation. And you will see the value. I did an experiment, put a small amount in some savings account, and anytime I see the interest notification, it's laughable. You know,
0.1 CD,
yes,
pesos and all that.
In fact, on my way here, I saw one that says 0.77 pesos.
Oh my word!
And then I'm thinking to myself, if you lock down this cash and you get 0.77 pesos, why won't somebody? Because you see, the impression on people's mind is very simple, and it was during the discussion that I found that out. When you are buying something worth 300 cedis in January, in December, that thing doesn't cost 300.
It costs, I mean, sometimes 3-4 times.
Sometimes there are situations where it will cost about 500 cedis. The same thing that you bought 300. So when somebody is told that his money will be increased at a certain point, what they do is that mentally they are trying to use that purchase, what do you call it, parity or what that purchase price measurement as a gauge that, oh, okay, me cry, if I buy this thing in January, if I bought it last year, it was 200 cedis. This year it's 350 cedis. So it means that if they are going to give me the interest, it's going to be the same amount. So using that kind of straight line rule as a very, innocent person on the street, you could easily be hoodwinked into thinking that, okay, these people are going to work with their money. So if me, I'm just buying something normally and then the price increases by this much, if someone is going to work with the money, then he is truly going to give me this one because he's probably going to do more work in that period and return the money to me. That's why, so they use it to justify why some of these things happen. And that's one. But you see, two, the most important thing is that in looking at the situation where you had so many people, especially groups, cooperatives, provident funds, a lot of those people went and put their funds into men's gold. I think it shows that we still do not understand investment very well. That investment isn't something that you should put all your eggs
in one basket.
I think should be one of the biggest lessons that anybody or any person on the street should learn, that you always have to diversify your investments. Take one that is less risky and one that seems riskier, but also learn to split your investment along all of these things, whether it's personal or whether it belongs to a cooperative or a grouping. Because you see, when you put all your eggs in one basket and something happens, even some of the most viable institutions break down, like the banks did. So you are not going to be in a situation where you are going to have everything like you dreamed of, because there are always random variables that exist. And so one of the things is that people should diversify their portfolio of investments. The fact that one is very good doesn't mean it's the best. It could crash at any time. So rather take one that is completely, not risky.
Minimal risk.
Minimal risk. Take one that is medium, and then you can decide that, okay, if you have done the two, then the surplus money that you have, you can put it in the more risky portfolio. So that is where we should look at it. But then again, we need to also ask for advice. People need to ask. If you are signing any contract where you are giving money to somebody to invest for you, the best thing you should do is to take the contract to a lawyer, not just anybody who says they are going to law school, but take it to a lawyer. Then let them charge you some small amount of money. That amount of money that they'll charge you and the advice is more valuable than the repercussions of you losing your investment at the end of the day. And I also believe that at this point, we should be able to have people who are designated as financial advisors becoming more accessible, because people really do have money that they want to invest in. People have life savings that they want to invest in.
But we have a culture in this country, don't we? People don't want anyone to know.
To know their business.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, you see, at a certain point, if you're able to try and build trust, even create hypothetical situations and ask people. But the thing is, go to qualified financial investors. Yeah. But then you see, in this particular men's situation, it's even complex because people who are even
financial advisors.
I was going to come in there, and I was going to say that, look, Kojo, you and I sat on this show, I think some 3 months ago, when a whole financial advisor, a broker, called from Takwa and did tell us that, I mean, they did all the background checks that they needed to do. They had invested over 5 million cedis. We sat here when Clara Barnes told us of $6 million that had been put in men's gold. We are sitting here, people from Bank of Ghana, directors at the Ministry of Finance, judges,
oh yes, I mean, highly trained professionals.
Professionals have, in fact, some bankers in the investment wing carried fixed deposits and went and put them.
Oh, I know people actually.
And you ask yourself that, is it greed or what? In fact, some people even moved monies that their institutions did not know. A pastor, after an offering, took the whole money
and put it in men's gold.
To men's gold. You understand?
So this is the point where you have to look at the gullibility of
medicine for greed.
Yeah, it's the gullibility of the Ghanaian in this particular case, because you see, when you are investing in someone, or when somebody says, "Come and invest with me," look at the person's lifestyle. Look, the biggest bankers are, all these Jews who, in banking. Do you see them living flamboyantly? No, because they respect the value of money. In this particular situation, somebody goes around, he is, so let me issue this disclaimer right here and then. I'm not saying the music industry is not profitable, but you take money that people are investing in you, and you are splashing it on each and every musician, any musician that you can lay your eyes on. I mean, the showbiz business is one of the most volatile. And then you pump so much money into showbiz, you pump so much money into sports. We don't see any other investments you are really investing in. And you personally go and buy a 17-year-old private jet. That costs more than $1 million to maintain. My first question would be, whose money are you using to do that? Are you getting so much profit that you can actually buy a private jet? I mean, these are things that people should have questioned. That when you see people investing in things, it's not only buildings that are investments. And even, I could tell you now that there are quite a lot of microfinances that are failing because all they did was they took all the people's deposits and went to build buildings, estate buildings, thinking that people will buy the estate buildings and then they'll get the money. And I know a few that have crashed because of that. So the thing about it is, it's not only building estate buildings that are the only ways to invest. And when people see edifices, especially in Ghana or in Africa, I realize that when people see edifices and buildings and nice suits and appearances with big men, they assume that for some reason that creates money.
But you see, I want us to also discuss, because everything you've said is right, from the perspective of the customer.
Yeah.
You know, this debate about were they being greedy or were they actually making a logical decision based on the facts before their eyes. And what were the facts before their eyes? They were dealing with a man who was standing next to the president, taking pictures with him, who had billboards. It wasn't like some corner office where he was luring people off the streets to take their money. He was operating in plain sight. He had billboards and posters all over the place. He was having people endorse his business. He was winning awards. We had members of our government calling him a visionary entrepreneur. They were going to him to ask him to fund government projects.
Well,
okay.
Bulldog said that he can give advice on how Ghana can get $50 billion or $1 million.
Yes, there you go. Okay, so you see, all of these things, to a person who works at Abusiukai, has a couple of shops, makes a few million every month, and wonders what to do with his money, because there are such people, quite a lot.
Oh yes, there are quite a lot of them.
And is trying to decide what to do with his money. Is there anything at all that will indicate to him that, and by the way, those dividends he's promising, he's paying them every month. Okay, so is it greed, or is it a logical decision when a person takes their money and goes to invest it there? I mean, the absence of all the financial knowledge.
It is a combination of all of them, but the biggest thing is that the regulators, BOG and SEC, sat there, did nothing for this guy to go that far, and that was gross negligence as far as I'm concerned. They can, I mean, the regulators as BOG and SEC and IOCO and other financial regulators cannot go to every nook and cranny, right, and then say, who are you collecting money for, what are you doing? But to the extent that some of them start growing to a certain point, we should be able to stamp them off, I mean, right from the get-go. Because you see, why are you there as a regulator? It's to sanitize the market. Yeah. Do you sit there and allow, I mean, and the data was compelling. People were withdrawing monies from, I think, I hear one particular financial institution, they saw that, especially the rural banks, they saw that people were always withdrawing, were clearing their accounts, and they were asking their clients, what are you going to use the money for? Especially in Takwa. They said, oh, they are going to put it in men's gold. So some of the financial institutions also took the deposits and they want to put it in men's gold.
And you see,
that's the truth of the matter.
And Salom, one of the things, I think that this is also a wake-up call to the banks and financial institutions in this country. I mean, you just talked about the fact that you've done some investment, or even just normal deposit accounts that you have opened, and savings or whatever it is, and you look at the interest, it's so meager. And then if men's gold comes and says, every month I can give you 24%, and I have 100,000 sitting in the bank, which at the end of the month I cannot even get close to 10 cedis or 20 cedis.
Sometimes your bank charges.
And the bank charges, sometimes you see the interest come, and then the bank charges will wipe it off and even take part of your money. Yeah. And then you are like, really, what is happening? And I've seen that with one of my banks. And I'm looking at them like, okay, I think I need to go and take this money out of this place.
If I'm just paying them.
I'm just paying them.
You are paying them for money that is depreciating.
You understand?
You see, in this particular scenario, you see, and this is where a lot of financial education is popular, there's a time value of money.
Exactly.
So as money sits there, its value or its residual value must appreciate. Because as time goes on, inflation comes. So if the money is 300 cedis, because of inflation, at the end of the year, it's not 300 cedis.
It's less, actually.
It's less in value. And then during that time, so you see, that is where people got the miscalculation wrong, like I said, because they see that inflation raises the prices of goods and services. So they believe that, okay, if somebody comes and says it's 24%, he probably really is working with the money and then paying back. But then the truth of the matter is that he isn't. And it is the time, this is the time where the regulators should be extra vigilant and not wait until these scams come and fold up before they start educating the public. And the education alone is not enough. We can't sit down and allow these things to go on to this point when we allow, because people are appearing with other people and all that. But then the thing is that for anybody who wants to invest their money anywhere, they should look at the kind of people in the company. This is a company that had people with no background in finance. Yeah. I don't think that randomly a set of geniuses will pop up like mushrooms out of nowhere within a space of 2 years. And then suddenly they can double the amount of money you're having. Yeah. When they don't, none of them, if you look at the executive board of Men's Gold, nobody has any background in finance.
I've seen their contract.
You know, yeah, that's another issue. But I think Salom has given some very important pointers for 2019. If you have money you want to invest, these are some of the things you need to think about. Look, we can't let this happen twice in our country. But if I may be permitted 30 seconds of editorial space, I want to use that to say something very important to our government. We hear some members of government saying that customers of Men's Gold are greedy. That's why they are in this predicament, and so there is not going to be any desire on the part of government to bail them out. That is a government decision that I will not comment on. I won't even bring up the fact that in the case of DKM, government this party made a campaign promise to bail them out. I won't raise that issue. What I will say is that before you call these people greedy, ask yourself if you've done your job. Now that this individual has cleared all of his furniture from the buildings that he used to rent, now that all the management of this company have evaporated into thin air and are not answering their phones, now that the individual himself and his family have moved out, now that they have failed to renew their leases on any of their rented property, at what point do you think as a government you should start a law enforcement process to locate this individual, seize his assets, so that those who can be paid back will be paid back? At what point do you think you should take up that responsibility? And should you not do it before you start calling them greedy? I want to thank you both for your time with us. We appreciate it very much. Salom Brandt here, Vice President of Imani Ghana. Happy New Year to you. And of course, Norvan Akwahe from the Joy Business team. Always a pleasure